Thank you all so much. We are excited to have you all here. We want to give you a little context about our work and our organization and what we are proposing to do this year. So nationally, black men make up 2% of the U.S. teacher workforce. Here in Philadelphia, it's about 4%. Can I get a show of hands of how many people have had over 5 black male teachers in your K through 12 career? 4? 3? 3, yeah, I see, okay. 2? 1? 0. Right. We like to do this exercise all the time to show that the dearth of black male educators is just not a local issue, but is a national issue. In our organization, we started out as a group of brothers who were in the education space in schools, really trying to understand what our experiences were. So we met up monthly for dinners, just talking about representation, talking about retention, talking about recruitment, and half of us was ready to quit our jobs. When you think about what impacts a black male educator, and sometimes we're seen as a disciplinarian, also the instructor, also the parent liaison, the community liaison. So much is put on a black man in a school because we are seen as the people that need to keep the kids in check. And so how do we combat that narrative that we also serve purpose? We also want to be developed professionally. We also are instructional leaders. And so to be seen outside of this one dimension of who we are, we need affinity spaces just like this for us to come together to talk about how can we lift up our collective voices so that we see more representation in our schools. Because when we see the kids, there's millions of kids that go to school every day. And whether they internalize it or not, there's a growing diversity gap among their teachers. And we always say at BMEC that you cannot be what you cannot see. Period. You cannot, it's impossible for us to ask our students to imagine themselves in a world where they are successful, where they are represented, where they are heard, and yet day to day they don't have that experience in their own classrooms. A lot of what inspired this work for me was that I was inspired by my black male 7th grade teacher, Mr. Freeland. Mr. Freeland was considered a radical by many standards. But to every student that passed through his classroom, we seen him as a role model. We respected him. Mr. Freeland was the type of man who would stand on top of desk to teach the lesson. He is the one who would sit by us if we interrupted class. His favorite mantra was, "Nothing disturbs the learning." And he would command our attention. He talked about the curriculum. He taught us the lesson, but he also taught us about life. He taught us about sweatshop and capitalism and beauty standards. And he used to always say, "I'm going to sue P. Diddy because he's selling y'all a lot of dreams. Y'all come in here with y'all sneakers. Y'all come in here with y'all clothes. Y'all think that's it." But every day he tried to send us a message. One story I will never forget is we were sitting in the classroom, and this guy was kind of brushing his new Jordans, and he wasn't paying attention. And so Mr. Freeland asked him to take off his shoes. He said, "Those are some nice sneakers. Please take your sneakers off. Let's show the class." And he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you how much this capitalist society has imbued your mind so much that you attach your value to material things." And he hung the Jordans out of a 3rd-story window and dropped them. Could you imagine the collective gasp? "Oh my goodness, he dropped his shoes out the window. Oh my goodness." And of course the students like, "I can't believe you dropped my shoes out the window." And so everybody's like, he's like, exactly. He's like, but if your value wasn't attached to these things wouldn't get in the way of your learning. These things wouldn't get in the way of who you're trying to be, to become in the future. These things wouldn't distract you. And of course, the shoes were returned. The principal was like, "Mr. Freeland, don't do that again." But it was a valuable lesson, and we all remembered it. And those who have come through Mr. Freeland's class since then, we've always talked about him. And he was our 7th grade teacher. We're 30 years old now, and we still talk about his impact on our lives. So when you imagine that kind of impact that it had on me, my other classmates, to take our lives more seriously, why can't that be true for every Philadelphia public school student? Because there's something about an educator who understands the responsibility to the work, and this organization is just not about recruiting any black man. We are looking for black men who understand their responsibility and their positionality in this work and their relationship to schools and students and what that responsibility truly means, what that representation truly means. Because that is where you inspire the future educators, the future entrepreneurs, the future lawyers, the future doctors. We recently took a trip to Harvard University for the Black Policy Conference. We took a group about, I would say, 12 students. And to see the eagerness in their eyes of wanting to learn about mass incarceration, wanting to learn about community leadership, wanting to learn about how they can stand up as young people to have impact. They had questions. Their feedback was incredible. And their energy coming back, they were so energized. They was like, when are we doing the next thing? It's that kind of hunger and drive in our students that we need to continue to cultivate. Right now, the narrative of teaching is that it doesn't pay. You're dealing with terrible students. Let's just be real. This is what's out there. And you know who lift up those narratives? It's not people outside the school building. It's the people that come to work every day in the school building. And so it's not about a leaky pipeline. It's about broken mindsets that we need to fix. Institutional, top down. We work with major school districts across the country who say, we want your support, we want help, we want to see more diversity in our schools. Well, then we have to improve the culture. We got to look at the pay. We got to look at all the resources and the things that are going to bring this amazing talent into these school districts. Otherwise, we continue to perpetuate this idea that we're going to put our black male educators in the most challenging schools, in the most impossible situations, and then when they leave, we say, black men don't want to teach. Not true. I had the honor of doing calls for folks that were coming into Philadelphia, wanting to get placed in a public school, and they would ask questions about the schools. Like, well, we heard Philadelphia schools are so bad. And so we were like, what is the message for black men to be attracted to this space? And what we found is, it's this idea of social activism, purpose, impacting the next generation. And when we start elevating those narratives about what it means to teach, they become less and less concerned about how much they're getting paid because they feel like they're doing something valuable for their community. They feel like they're standing in the gap. And this is for black men who historically have been pushed out of the system. When we look at the black boy experience in schools, suspension rates, the trauma, the idea that they get labeled, everything during their whole lifetime in schools, they have told them there's no space for you here. But that is why organizations like ours exist, because we are demanding a space for our young black boys and our young black men and our black men to be able to stand up in these classroom spaces and not only teach effectively, but really inspire and empower our students that they can go much further than what the society limits have placed on them and what schools have been telling them that they can be. We have a membership base of over 1,100 folks on our listservs, people who have attended our convenings, who talk about, I want to do this work, I want to partner, I want to make sure that we have strong representation, I want to make sure diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the forefront of the conversation. Understand that when you sign up for this type of work, that your message is always not going to be popular. Understand that sometimes they won't understand why is it so important for us to talk about a diversity conversation among our students. Research is showing it. About 3-4 years ago, we couldn't find anything about the impact of black male educators. Now, there's research out there. John Hopkins, Travis Bristol, Sean Harper, all of these folks are coming up in the space and saying that if you have a black male teacher between early grades, between first and fourth grade, you're more invested in your education. We have higher expectations for our students. discipline rates go down. They are more invested to want to go to college and pursue a career, because it's that example. It is that the power of that relationship. Our students are not going to just sit down and look at a paper and read a book. They want to feel that the person that's standing in front of them is a true advocate for them. And they want to meet that expectation. They want to meet that high bar. And so we have a high school program that we do. We have a college program that we're implementing. We have folks that are mid-career changers who are trying to get into this work. One of our biggest challenges is certification. One of our biggest challenges is the practice exam. I mean, there's a lot of research talking about testing bias, and we even take it so far as to advocate on a policy level about how we're qualifying folks to even walk into the school building. Because if you're telling me a test can indicate how effective you can be as a teacher, then I have a lot of questions of folks who pass that test and still are not impacting our students. I have questions around the student achievement gap and all the other labels we place on it. But it's going to take a community of educators, folks from cross-sector. I don't just believe it's just the education space, but we need colleges, universities. We need folks in business, in the corporate sector. We need folks talking about how can we contribute to public education in a way that we're transforming the narrative about what it means to teach, who needs to be in front of our students, and how do our students best succeed. And so the Fellowship Black Male Educators for Social Justice is engaged in that work every day. We have been around for about 1.5 years operationally. That's what I like to say, with full-time staff. And before, we were just working full-time in schools and trying to do our best to pull these affinity groups together. And now we have gotten investments from sponsors, folks nationally who have said we want to lift Philadelphia up as a model for how we bring the collective together to respond to a national problem. And so right now, if you ever think about civil rights, what I've done during the civil rights movement, and some of us was there, but now is another opportunity where we're having the same conversation. Because black unemployment, graduation rates, what schools are offering our students, is still not cutting it. And we got to be real about that. But the only way we stand up is if we take responsibility and say, spaces like these, we demand to have spaces like these so that we can map out what the education should look like for our students. And not leave that up to a state or the federal government to dictate to us about the kids that we see every day in these school buildings and know what they need. 3 top reasons why black men leave schools. We know the research. 1, they feel isolated. You're 1 or 2 to a building. You have no community. You feel disenfranchised. You don't feel heard. And you don't feel like you're getting a proper professional development to be effective in the classroom. Many folks will come to the classroom, do observations. As long as you got the classroom under control, they say you're a good teacher. That's not it. That's not it. And we got to understand the broader implications of that. We want highly effective educators in front of our students. People who know their content. People who can teach. We've seen successful classrooms. We know what that looks like. And every day that we miss the opportunity to speak up and say that we need more highly effective educators in our classroom, we let more and more slip through the cracks. And then we blame society and, the music and the culture. And no, but where does the responsibility start? It starts with us in this room. And so you are at a historic moment in the city. We have the endorsement of Dr. Haidt, who has been adamant about our work, that we need to really take up this mantle and run. I remember the first Black Male Educator convening we did back in 2014. We expected about 50 people to show up. 150 people showed up in that room, standing room only. And I remember Dr. Haidt saying, I was like, well, this is it. I mean, This was just a one-time event. And he said, no, you can't get momentum like this and let it drop. You got to keep this going. And so we kept going. And then they were like, well, this needs to become a nonprofit organization. I was like, we were just trying to develop an affinity space. And then ultimately, now we have 3 full-time staff members, and we're working to grow the organization. So we need your support. We need your help. We need your input. We need your feedback. We need to go behind closed doors and just keep it real about the work that we really need to do. I love to hear the advice. Brother, that's not it. Here's what my opinion is. This is what we need to develop and grow. And so please use this day as an opportunity for us to network with one another and just learn from one another. We have a lot of great workshops ahead, things that, conversations that need to be had around what the real needs for current black male educators in schools are so that we can help provide those resources and support. We're looking to use this as a launching pad for our national convening that will be October 18th through the 20th at the downtown Sheraton Hotel. Last year we had 1,100 people. This year we're expecting 1,500, so this movement continues to grow. So make sure that you're inviting folks to the conversation. If you don't get anything else out of today, I want you to think about who else needs to be in this room. Who else needs to be having this conversation? And it's just not black folks. Who are the white folks that need to be in here? Who are the Latino and Latinas who are really going to stand up and advocate with us? And while our focus is unapologetically black men, we were adamant about that. We know that across the spectrum, there's just a lack of diversity in general. I always said that the teaching profession is a long, unaddressed issue in our country because when Brown versus Board of Education happened and integration of schools happened, racist school leaders got hired, pushed black folks out, and then they hired this kind of middle-class parent-teacher association type model of teacher that just wasn't relatable to our students. It was then we saw academics go down, we saw discipline rates go up, because there was a lot of unaddressed biases in our system that we just continue to be compliant in to the fact that it materialized into what we have today. And so what we've inherited is a problem. But I believe we got problem solvers in the room. And so your place in history right now is in response to long decades of racism, long decades of a broken education system. But today we're going to say, my favorite mantra, that 2% is just not enough. And we're taking a stance today, tomorrow, for as long as this organization will exist, to make sure that we lift that up. And so I like to end every talk that I have with this kind of call and response, because I feel like it fills the room with energy, but it gets everybody on the same page to recognize how desperate this problem is. And so when I say 2%, you gotta say it's not enough. Y'all ready? 2%? Not enough. 2%? Not enough. 2%? Not enough. Thank you.